Welcome. Check this out. It's a Spotify dashboard referencing and utilizing the new features released within Power BI Desktop. Today we're going to focus on two sections, the slicers, specifically the top slicer, which you can see has album covers, and as you hover over it or select it, slight formatting variations occur. And the pills, on the left-hand side as you select or hover over those, things change as well. At the end of this video, you will have a full confidence with how to utilize the new slicers released within Power BI. Please take a minute, hit the subscribe button. It will significantly help this channel grow and enable us to just keep making more content for you. It matters to me as well. Please hit subscribe. Let's get into it. All right. So here we are. What we're going to do is break this down into three sections. The first section is going to be an overview of the dashboard. The second section is going to go over the pills on the left-hand side. The third section will go over the titles and the tiles on the top. So this dashboard is cool. Here's how it functions. We're pulling in Spotify information. You'll see that the key for this tutorial will be hover over the left-hand side. The pill filter is going to be the artist. As you hover over it, it's going to show the total number of views and the formatting will change. As you select, it's going to change as well so you know what you have selected. Within there's KPIs left to right, number of artists, number of albums, number of streams, average tempo, average duration, popularity average. As you select something, the albums show up. So now if we're here and let's say we deselect these, the third part of the video, the second part again will be to get that whole pill thing configured. The final part will go over detail how to set up these great looking tile type of filters where as you connect or click on them, again, you hover, the image blurs. It's a slight thing, it looks good. We're gonna really focus on formatting and how to get things looking good. That extra step of formatting is gonna make a big difference. As you click or hover, you'll see it changes. As you click, again, it's gonna change as well. So you know what you have selected. All the formatting is on theme. The key way we're gonna do this is we're gonna build in a duplicative manner. What that means is I have what's called a lab tab down here in the bottom left. Let me turn on my cursor. That will help us follow along as I move around and click. So what I'll do is with the lab tab, if I delete this, I'm going to select a filter from over here, paste it on the lab tab, and then we'll build it. There'll be future videos talking about how to build additional cool KPIs, how to do awesome 100% charting based upon measures, which is a little bit different than you'd expect, transforming data. But today we're gonna dive into this. So let's jump into the first step, which is the pills. I'm going to copy this, put it on the lab tab so we have a reference. In this case, we won't sync. What sync means is if you put Slicer on multiple report tabs and you click it in one place, it's going to filter and change everything. So that can be really beneficial when you deploy a report or users working with it. But in this case, we don't need to sync them up because we're doing development. All right. So I'll take this and just so we have an exact frame of reference, I'll move it a little bit more over here in the middle. Scroll this up. Let's build the exact same thing. So the first way to do this, and what you're gonna do through this process is you're gonna just learn how to configure these slicers so you can build great looking interactive slicers on any dashboard that you create in different ways. My goal is to show you nuances. Notice the slight glow changes as well, a whole bunch of stuff. So here we go. When you create a new slicer, it's going to be under the slicer section, and it has the lightning bolt referencing it's new. So what I'm gonna do, just to keep this thing one-to-one, I'll zoom in as well, that might help, is I will enable this formatting on the right-hand side, and we have our canvas. So when you first add a filter, it looks like this. What this is doing is in this data model on the right-hand side, there's a value called artist. So I'm gonna add the artist, that's what we want to filter by. When you first bring it up, it's gonna look like that. So I'm gonna show you how to go from this all the way to this. It's a big difference, and these formatting techniques are gonna be extremely helpful for you. All right, so the first thing we're gonna do is, I'm a big fan of decluttering. Always, I look on the right-hand side, the formatting, the title's on. I don't need the title. People should be able to determine this is an artist. So remove the title and let's start to shape it. So the key, we'll start with size and style. This is applicable to any visual, but typically this is going to be the width, the height, and the general attributes about the holistic image. So the whole big border, not the things inside of it. What I do care about is I don't want a background. So let's turn that off. Okay. That's the only adjustment we're going to make on size and style. When you go into here, actually we might make more in a bit, but you can adjust the padding, which is valuable. So you don't have all this extra space. And I think I have padding set up over here. So we will change that in a little bit. But I want to first just start to frame this sucker up for us. So the way we do that is we click it. And what you notice first is things aren't laid out the same. So by deductive reasoning, the layout section is where you want to go. You'll feel really good about how to navigate all these menus at the end of this tutorial. So layout, there's going to be the two primary fields are right here, rows and columns. Because what you're going to notice is the way that this is set up is, well, I'll zoom out just for a second, is that the visual itself is always going to have the static number of things presented. So right now there's 3 rows and there's 3 columns. If I increase this to 4 rows, now there's 4, 5, it goes all the way up to 10. So we're gonna max this thing out, go all the way to 10. That's what we wanna do. But for columns, we don't wanna have a whole bunch of dots in this one. Again, maybe in things you create, you'll want to, but in this case, we don't. So I'm going to set that up, put it here as well. And we are cooking. So let me zoom back in. All right, we have the layout. As again, what this does too is you're going to be able to adjust space between cards. But what I first want to do is I'm going to jump into the kind of the section that's going to change the overall shape of these things. And what you'll notice is if you do this step and you have the December update installed, you may get a weird formatting error where things jump out of alignment. If that happens, it's expected. It's a bug. I think they're going to fix it in the future release. If you do install the November update, you'll be just fine. If you have any questions about that, ping me. I'll be happy to help you. You can have them both going as well. So what I'm going to do is come down to the buttons. And if you think about the way this is laid out, I'll talk through each of these categories quickly, and the future ones will be easier to understand. The buttons are going to be the overall big old pill that you have here. Images will be things that are deployed within them, which we'll look at. The callout value and the reference label, which we'll get to, is going to be the data inside, and then layout is the overall structure. So as we're going to go to the buttons, let's do this. If you enable the shadow and the glow, you'll see things just shrunk. And the goal is I want to be able to format these in a way where they just seem like they're kind of more floating, a little bit better looking than what's typically there. So let's turn these on. And by default, what you're going to see is that within the button section, there's going to be applied settings to selectable. So we're going to know that if you click in this, there's the default state, which is what we're at now. We're at when you're not touching anything. If you do hover, that's what the formatting is going to be when you hover over something like this. As you can see that change. When you click press, it's going to be the minute I'm clicking and holding down. That's all grayed out. That's the press. I'll come back to this visual. Again, there's default settings, which we're going to make better. Then there's selected. So after you click something, what it's going to look like. All right. So what we want to do is let's just keep shaping these things up first. So we've turned those on. We'll adjust the colors in more detail through each section. But my first goal is to get these pills looking about the same. So you enable the shadow and enable the glow, and we'll come back to do some additional formatting there. But now let's jump to the shape. So this is where you can kind of play around with it. And if you choose rounded rectangular, you can then fully round out those corners, and it will make it more like a pill shape. But what you notice is that things don't fit. But you can see in the left, they do fit. So there's some tweaks with plenty of space to go that we have to enable. To do that, the spacing and the callout value, thinking about in the middle of the visual, is what we're going to start with. So we're going to go to let's see here, images, buttons, padding. All right, so we're actually gonna go to padding. And in the state, set it to default because it's just how it is at rest. And in this padding, we're actually gonna choose custom because you can look at the standards, but if you have, oops, sorry, I wanna keep this in default. Padding wide, not gonna work. Normal, narrow, let's go custom. And so what I set this up is 0 all around and 13 because we're gonna add this here. So we'll set that up. We'll move it in a minute. So we're gonna go 0, 0, 0. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's just count, make sure these are set up the same. If we go back to layout, you can see 10 rows. And again, this one has 10 rows, so that's the same, which is perfect. All right, and what you're gonna notice is that there's a lot of space between these pills, so we need to adjust that. We wanna leverage all the canvas we have while still enabling things to look good. And so the way that we're gonna do that is, if we continue in the layout section, there's space between cards. Now this is a very important setting because it defaults to a way, especially when you enable glow and shadow, that it just takes up so much space. And so the way we can adjust that is by simply deselecting the space between cards in a decreasing fashion. So you can see I'm clicking down and now it's -4, -5, -6. You can even go so far where they're overlapping. If you want to get some kind of cool style like that can look kind of neat actually. In this case, I think I have it set to -4. So we're gonna do -4. If we scroll both these up to the top, I'll make it zoomed in as well. Now you can see that the pills are the same shape. That's great, that's a win. So let's keep moving forward. If I come back into this visual, the shape I feel confident in. The layout we're confident in. Now the callout values, let's look at these. So this is gonna be the key section where every setting has 4 states that I mentioned, the default, hover, press, selected. So within this is where you can configure the parameters for the formatting based upon those 4 states. What do you want it to look like when it's clicked? What do you want it to look like when people are hovering over it? So let's go through an example of setting that up. And it's important to follow along. So I published the file in GitHub. So you can track along with the link in the description about doing this process, doing it along with the video is going to enable that muscle memory to just click in so you can fly through these things in the future. So let's go through it together. What you're gonna wanna do for the callout values is you can notice first that they're white by default. So let's look at that. The values when, if I come back over here, in the state of default, I want them to be white. You can't see them now, they'll change. And then in hover, I want them to be black. So we'll come back over to default and change it to hover and pick this color to be black. And then when you press it, I'll just leave those as the default settings, but when you select it, it will go back to white. So when I come back over here, hover, and I'll press selected, and that will go back to white. Okay, cool. So we're just gonna focus on that value first. We've set that up. Again, you can configure the display units, which we'll look at later. Do you want it to show an abbreviated version, the full thing? And we're gonna get into label in a second. The second go about this, we'll look at images. But let's keep progressing on this. So there are 2 core things you want to think about are the callout value color and then the button background. So let's get out of the callout and go back to the button. So by default, I want the fill of this to be black. Okay, now we're starting to see some things, but we're gonna make a few changes. So by default, you can look to here's the other options that you have. The shadow, we're gonna adjust that. We want that to be white. The glow, another kind of slight luminescence there. We want that to be white as well. And you can configure if you want to move it outside, inside, position center, off center. You can change those to your liking. Another important section is going to be the border, which in this case is on, but we're going to turn it off. We don't need to see a border. It's going to kind of be highlighted. Another awesome thing that's just a slight variation that really helps your dashboard come to life are leveraging these accent fills. That's going to be on the button section on the very bottom accent bar. In this case, we're in default, but you can see it's just another triggering mechanism to say I'm hovering over something. Where I hover, it's green. When I press it, it's black. So let's just test these out right now by adding in the accent to the applicable state. We're going to go to accent bar, by default, accent, and we want it to be white. You can see it's going to be on the left, but nothing really shows up because we gotta change the transparency of this thing. We want it to, I'm on the wrong visual. Put that back. Right here. So button default. And now we're going to scroll down to the accent bar. We're going to turn it on. And we want it to be on the left, position white. And you can see it starts off to be very small. You can move this around, right, bottom, top. And there'll be different reasons to do it different ways. But in this case, we're going to set it on the far left and increase that width to 14, I think is what it was. And the reason why I chose that is it just visually looked appealing to me. But what you're going to notice is what I mentioned earlier, is that now the text overlaps it. So that's where we go back to the padding. So what that is a callout value. So we're going to go to the callout value section, and we're going to say by default, the, let's see here. Oh, the button, sorry, just the button padding. So it's going to be under the button padding section, and then the padding, and we're going to increase this to 13. Now this is moving it over, so we're in alignment. Buttons, 13. All right, that's looking much better. So let's just test first the font. If I click it, nothing's still changing. Let's make everything change like this. So what I'm going to do next is we're going to set up the fills. We're going to click this visual. Go back to, since we have this added now, let's adjust the accent for each of these actually. Button, state, default, we set it up to white. If you hover over it, I want it to be green. So now if we're gonna pick hover, and I'm gonna want the glow to change, you can see subtly it changes to black. So let's make this glow black. Let's make the shadow black. And again, this is when you hover over it. So really going through and figuring out combinations for all these is going to be nice. Then on the left-hand side, I want this to be green. So there you go. I've changed this where the fill color, I want this actually to be white. This is very fresh. We'll show you how to add the next reference label in here as well. But if we just test it, if I hover, if I click, hover, click, it's not quite yet because I need to change the fill to when I click that it's that green. So now let's look at the settings for what we want to do when this is selected. So when it's selected, the border is going to be off. The fill, this is that Spotify green. We're going to want to use this. Click here, but you'll notice as well when I click this, the accent's black. So I'm going to come back over to this, scroll down to the accent, and let's change that to be black when you're selected on it. Just like that. That's good. And the font and formatting, everything checks out. Everything's working great. So that's how we get the formatting settings set up for these pills. You hover over it, you click, and think about all the combinations and ways you can do that. It's extremely valuable. But now let's talk about another key component. And that component is going to be the reference label or the label. So you have a call out value, and in this case, it's going to be the artist, which is, Aerosmith, Adele. And by any status, you can choose to show a label. So what I like is that it's not over cluttered. You can show it if you want, but the goal is just to show you how you can toggle things on and off. In this case, if you hover over somebody, it will show you their total number of streams. We want that to happen. So I'll show you two things you need to do because you're going to encounter a problem. I'm going to show you how to fix that problem. So if we come into here, what you'll do is under callout values, label. Well, we want to set it first by hover. We're going to turn it on. So now it's going to ask for a field. You'll see it's blank. All right. Well, why is that? Because you have to be in the default state to add the value you want to show up. So I'm going to show a value that's going to have an issue, and I'll show you how to then format it so it will work. So there's something that we have in here called number of streams. I'll add that. And you can see the value is not formatted. There's no commas. But first, let's get it to show up in the right way. And the way that you do that is now when we go to hover, it's on, but default will turn it off. Just like that. So you can select the states when you want this label to show up. If we go back to hover, you'll see it showing up there. But what you'll notice is that within these values, there's not a formatting option. You can't choose to round it, to do anything. So we have to do the formatting in the measure itself. So the way you're going to do that is if you have a measure that calculates sales or anything else, we're going to create a separate measure. And that's going to be, in this case, I called it Z labels. And it's going to be label artist. And so what you can do, if we look up here in the top, is create something that basically you do your calculation. In this case, I was doing a little bit of a DAX behind the scenes. But the net thing is you want to wrap your result of the calculation in this format. So format, and then if you can look it up, but there's lots of different ways you can set this up. But in this case, it's going to be number, comma, number with no decimals. If you wrap anything in that format, then it will format it with commas and everything you need. So in this case, since that doesn't show up there, we're going to use this value instead. So we're going to come back to default. We're going to go to the labels on. We're going to take this off. We're going to move over the label that I've created that has the comma. And now that shows up. We need to do the same thing. We're on default. I don't want it on. On hover, I do. And there you go. And now we want the font to show up as well. You can see it's a little bit bigger. It doesn't quite groove. So on the left-hand side, it's green. On this side, it's black. Let's change that as well. So hover in the label, I'm going to want the font to be the Spotify green, and I want it to be bold as well. And now we're matching up. And so and you can move it. If you want to put it above or below, you can change the spacing. Again, you'll have to do all those things in the default setting when you have this enabled. So if you wanted to change the spacing of it, move it even closer, like that, you can. So you are set up with how to build cool pill filters. If you look back on the analytics side, now you can see if I zoom back out on this dashboard, a little too far, there we go. We'll go to this, view, page view, fit to page. That now, what we have is a dashboard where when I'm picking an artist, I can go through and select them, and it's gonna show up. But that's a really cool interactive way to build those filters. So now let's jump to the second part of this tutorial. And it's going to be, how do we make it look like this? The blur, the image filled up. What are my options? The same way you can see things pop up. This section will be a little bit faster because we've already done a lot of the same thing. It's just a different look on how to apply it. So let's dive into that. What we're going to do is I'll copy this, go to the lab tab, delete this. Oops, I deleted the whole page. Didn't want to do that. So I'll just duplicate this again. Delete this, delete this, delete this. And we're looking good. I'll call this lab tab. And again, this file will be in GitHub so you can look at it. Now let's build this exact same thing. As you can see from the spacing, I wanted to show multiple tiles. I didn't want it to be too small, but you can adjust that if you want. So let's start the same exact way we did before. I'm going to insert the new slicer and kind of square it up here. Great, so what is this first filtering on? The album. So I'm gonna come to the album and pick it. Very simple, deluxe, the same way. So now let's go into the layout, and I'm gonna go a little bit faster this time because we've discussed these, but this is where I'm going to set the rows to 2. The number of columns, you can kind of feel it out how you want. I chose 6. Maybe you want to make it smaller, bigger on yours, but you can go right into that. So the first thing I'm going to do is the same step I like to do, which is remove the title, and then the buttons. I want the buttons in the state of default to have, I'm going to bring this up here, have a shadow and have a glow. We'll adjust what those are in a minute. but we are here. So now let's go right first to the images. That's the key difference between these. And again, we'll make it look good too. So let's start with, actually, let's just start by getting those squares the same shape, the same layout. So the way that we do that again is, remember the buttons and default, there's a padding section. And within that, we're going to set it up to be custom or narrow, just like this one. You can do custom, you can change it. That's going to move these around. And then if we go into the layout, space between cards, right now it's at 5. Let's change that to 0. And there you go, makes them a little bit bigger. Okay, so the cards are close. We'll change the glow and go through this process to make them match exactly. Same with the accents. You can see they're still there, they're a little different in the blur. But let's jump into the images. So within your data model, in this case, for this one, we have something called album URL. Again, if you upload a file of your whatever you want in your data model to Dropbox or OneDrive, you can obtain that URL, put in your data model for every visual you want, and it will call it just automatically. It's very easy. One thing you can do, it's not necessary, but it will help, is if you configure the data category to image URL. Things will work just the same, but it just helps you keep things organized and classified. So what we see here is that the background is on. Let's turn that off. Now we have our boxes. They're looking pretty similar. So images. All right, what I want in the state default, we're going to add the image URL. And it's going to show up just like that. There's a couple of options which you should look at. It's going to be, you can do normal. It kind of doesn't take up the whole space. It keeps the ratio exact. Fill, which is going to be similar to fit, but fit kind of can change it and contort it. Fill is going to fill it and keep the same ratio. But another cool thing that you should look at is if you want to choose to set an image of the background. And I was thinking about doing it in this design, but I decided to stay away from it. But it looks cool. It basically fills the entire square up. And then you can see the text moves on top, and you can format it then after that. So this is a really cool option of setting the background, but in this case, we're going to leave it like it is with fill. So let's keep going. And what we notice is the glow is not green on default. So let's set up those different glows. Under buttons, default, glow shadow. Well, by default, it's going to be white. Default white. That matches, as well as border. We don't need a border. Turn that off. It looks like the border is still on. It's interesting. But for each button, we can come up to the border. Just turn on to test. Oh, it's because of the glow. It's fine. So now what we're going to do is look at how you can blur it. So when you go over an image, just these subtle differences kind of help it come more alive. As you can see, if you hover over by default, nothing really changes too much. So let's set up those accent bars. By default, they're going to show up. They're going to be green, and that's just kind of saying, hey, this is something you can pick. We'll put it at the bottom. We'll make it the Spotify green, and we'll change the width to, I think, 4 is what I did. Let's double check. 7. And there you go. Let's set up the other ones while we're here. So by default then, when you click on it, we're going to want when you hover, we want it to go away or be white, and then we'll have it go away. So by default, we're going to change that to hover. And when you hover, we're going to have this go away. So you can see hover, it goes away. We're going to figure out how to make that cool kind of popping, that slight pop. We're going to show you how to set that up now. And finally, when you click on it, it's going to come back and it's going to be white. All right, so to start to figure out how to get this cool popping effect, what we want to do is go to the image, and we're going to change the image to when you hover, and we're going to blur it. In this case, I picked 53%, so we'll mirror 53%. And now that subtle thing, when you just hover over it, it kind of gives that pop. But we're going to show you how to do a little bit more with it. So let's go to the callout values and get those squared away. By default, you can see they're not in the middle. They need to be in the middle. And also the size looks a little bit bigger to me. So if we come up here, you can see it's actually 10. We're going to change this to 10. And by default, the color is white, but that background spot is black. And you can see in the callout value, there's no possibility of selecting the background. And that's because we have to go back to the button. So in the button, by default, we're going to want to have the fill. And in this case, the fill is going to be black. So remember, the fill is in the button section. The callout value itself is in the callout section. And when you hover over it, we're going to want that. Let's just look at the rest of these things while we're here. When we click on it, we're going to want it to be Spotify green. That kind of shows that it's selected. So we're going to come up to here, pick green. There you go, 1989 Deluxe. It's slightly still different here. So let's just make it even more identical. If you come back to this, and we're here, let's look at how we can add the same reference label. So what you notice is when I hover over something with the actual, it pops up the artist name. So similarly to how we did it before, we're going to do it again here. And the way you do that is you come to the section of callout values. And when we hover, we're going to want the label. Oh, we have to go to default first and add it. So in this case, we want the artist name. So under the artist section, there's an artist. Turn this on, add the artist name. And we don't want it on by default, but we can turn it on while we're formatting it. When we hover is when we want it to show up. And we want that to show up in green and bold. Just like that, and I think size 10. Taylor Swift. And the callout value changes as well. So when we hover, let's just change that too. Up here we can see it's actually 11 in bold. So we're going to set bold, 11, and black. Again, the goal of this is to get the reps, get the repetitions in of how to set up and configure these visuals. That way when you're building a dashboard, it's just going to be second nature to you. So in this case, you can see we configured this up. It blends perfectly, it matches, and if you select it, things change and move around. With these fundamental concepts, you are able to build slicers that will wow your end users. Again, there's the new card visual. I have another video about that. Feel free to check that out. I'll be making a 2.0 of that one. But again, thank you for watching. Enjoy this slicer. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments. I will definitely respond. And have a great day. Talk to you later. Bye.